When my son used a microphone to announce I wasn't family anymore, my answer wasn't an angry speech. It was found in the quiet of a cedar chest and in the order of a red folder. This is the story of how I prepared for my own storm, and when it was my turn to speak, I let the paper talk first. Because paper, unlike people, doesn't lie. Some betrayals don't announce themselves with slamming doors. They arrive in the carefully cheerful language people use when they want to change a thing without naming the cost. If you've ever kept a place running beside a big piece of water, you know how to hear weather inside a sentence. The lake has its own vocabulary. Gusts that sound like advice, ice that acts like certainty until it isn't, fog that hides the dock you laid out with your own hands. People are the same. They'll tell you a storm is an update, and you'll be expected to applaud the rain for being so modern. I've learned to keep a dry cloth on the counter for that kind of forecast. My name is Nora McKenna. I am 60 years old, a widow, and I run a small dock and diner just east of Thunder Bay, where Lake Superior stoops in close and pretends to be tamed by a line of creosote posts. We call it McKenna Dock Diner because my husband liked names that say what they are. He used to run cargo at night and taught me how ships listen to a shoreline, even when the men on the bridge forget to. These days, I listen for other things. The cough of our diesel pump when the filter needs changing, the click in the coffee maker that means the thermostat is about to go, the way boots walk across the planks when a storm is at the mouth of the bay. The diner sits back from the water, a rectangle of windows and the kind of stools you can swivel in if you think no one is looking. The dock moves in weather like a living thing, but it answers honestly when you test a plank. I trust that. Mornings have always been a contract between me and work. I get up at 5 when the plows are still deciding which roads to save first and set the oven to preheat. Bread wants a warm room to rise in. The diner wants lights on, salt shaken out of the door track, a kind hand on the stubborn lock that sticks where the wood swells. I check the freezer inventory while the coffee percolates, count eggs, mark down which shipments should arrive from the cash and carry if the highway holds. On paper, with a pencil. Because paper does not crash and pencils do not pretend they are smarter than you. I sweep the floor with the long-handled broom my husband swore had a particular balance to it. And I prop the door for 5 minutes no matter the temperature because a place keeps its soul if you let fresh air run through it at least once a day. By 6, the first customers arrive. Some wear orange jackets and the kind of fatigue a person accumulates on shift work. Some wear the glossy fleece of municipal crews. In summer, we get tourists who want eggs in a skillet that doesn't look like a photograph. In winter, it's mostly locals. Tug crews, ice road contractors, a teacher who comes in once a week with papers to mark, and a hunger for bacon you can't put on a school wellness poster. I keep my voice in the low register people trust before sunrise. I fill cups without asking and slide sugar packets across the counter like poker chips that always come up showing hearts. My son Lucas is 32. He came back from school with a business certificate and shoulders that looked broader in suits. He wanted to scale the dock and upgrade the diner. I wanted the pump to work and bills to be paid. When his father was alive, he worked the boats in winter and helped me patch the planks in spring. We saved for a new ice machine in a jar old enough to have held pennies. When he got sick, I learned how to put my hand on the side of the compressor and tell if it would fail before the weekend. After he died, the dock leaned into me the way a dog will. Closer, heavier, not to knock you down, just to see if you're steady enough to hold its weight. Lucas's daughter, my granddaughter Ava, is 5. She thinks every piece of rope is a chance to learn a new knot, and that the diner's bell rings for her. I have learned to count her steps on the dock while I carry dishes. A person becomes a metronome without meaning to when she loves a small child near deep water. Lucas's partner, Alina, is in marketing. I do not say that with a curl of the lip, though I would be forgiven it. She has clever eyes and a neat way with a scarf. She doesn't smell like fried things or diesel even when she stands beside both. She tells me things like, language frames the user's journey, and a brand is a promise. I tell her the dock is a promise shaped like boards and bolts, and the diner's brand is coffee hot enough to matter when the wind finds your wrists. I had been letting Lucas take on more of the office work because my eyes prefer a ledger book to a laptop, and because men at banks act like screens keep them from seeing how tired a woman is. He set up new systems, consolidated vendor accounts, and made nice with the fuel distributor. I gave him authority to sign for deliveries, and because he asked, I let his name appear on a social page I never read. My husband used to say, trust is just a calendar with the right people on it, and putting Lucas on the calendar felt natural. I did not give him the deed to my name. I did not hand over what lawyers call control. I did what mothers do when the ground doesn't look slippery until it is. I kept my hand outstretched and watched my boys step over new boards. There's a softness to some afternoons on Superior that fools you. Sun on snow will put a gloss on the water that looks gentle from behind glass. The week it happened, the diner was warmer than the world by exactly the amount a person needs to feel human again. Around noon, Alina came in with a box of glossy cards and a smile that belonged to a different weather system than mine. Behind her rolled a man with a portable display and another with camera gear. The counter had been cleared of placemats, and there was a new banner leaning by the coffee station, navy blue with white letters. Luxury Charter Launch, a new era at Superior Marina. I stood with a towel over my shoulder and watched the new name sit on our old walls. Superior Marina, Alina said, as if I should recognize it the way you recognize a cousin you haven't met yet. It tests better, she added. McKenna sounds dated. Dated is what we call things we would like to throw out without feeling like the sort of person who throws out good things because they embarrass us. I said nothing. I kept the towel in my hand and went to refill the hot water urn. By 2, the room had been rearranged for a press moment. Chairs borrowed from the Legion, a microphone with a cord that made the floor look official, a table laid with those tiny bottles of still water that make a person laugh if she grew up filling old milk jugs at the tap. Lucas wore a jacket I had not seen before and a face I recognized from his father, earnestness trying to wrap itself around worry. Alina opened the event by thanking the right people and introducing the team. She used the word legacy with a wide smile. Legacy is a word people bring out like silver. They polish it in public and then put it back in a cupboard that someone else has to dust. When Lucas took the mic, he did well. He always did in rooms like that. He talked about expansion, cleaner lines, and raising the profile of our waterfront. He thanked me for getting us here, which is a phrase that sounds generous if you don't know it's the preface to being shown to a seat in the audience. Then he said, McKenna Dock will be reimagined as Superior Marina, operated by a new founding team. And here he gestured toward himself and Alina and the developer whose fleece had no oil on it, our family. The journalist from the local paper, a woman whose mittens sat in her lap like paws, asked, "And Nora?" I could have kissed her for saying my name like a fact. Lucas kept his smile. Nora is stepping back, he said. She's not part of the new family operations. I know how to hear when a line frays. It makes a sound like a whisper you can't ignore. In the space his sentence made, the sound was a person choosing not to be my son in public. I felt in that moment like a board that had taken all the screws it could without splitting. I did not cry. I set down the towel, walked to the kitchen, and counted spoons. I washed a clean one because hands need jobs when speech will only break something you later have to fix. The rest went the way these events go. Photographs, applause for pie charts, words on the banner that made sentences out of weather. The developer spoke about upgrades and a premium demographic that sounded like people who will never ask you how your pump is holding up. Someone filmed a tour of the dock and cut our name out of the frame with such precision, it made me admire the cruelty. I watched the room smile at itself in reflections on the coffee urns and then watched it empty, leaving behind napkins that curled as they dried and a new press release page lying on the floor like a polite apology for taking your seat. After, Alina posted a picture to the docket of places I do not go. My son, his arm around her shoulder, the new banner behind them, her caption reading, "Founders, Family, Future." She tagged the press, she tagged the town. She tagged a line of clothing that would not last through 1 November on this dock. In the comments, someone wrote, "What about Nora?" And she replied, "We're grateful for the past. Now it's time to optimize." It is a strange thing to read your life explained by a stranger while standing in a room that smells of your coffee and your soap. I closed the diner as if nothing had happened. People still needed early suppers before the night shift, and the snowplows wanted coffee they didn't have to apologize for. I kept my voice even, and the eggs sunny side up. And when the last order ticket slid off the spike, I boiled the tea kettle, turned off the open sign, and walked out into air that made a noise when you breathed it. The lake was very still in the way it is when it's planning something. I locked the padlock on the fuel cage and checked the rope that ties our pump hose up out of the reach of a wind that likes to unlace things. Home is 30 steps from the diner. Up a set of stairs, my husband sanded himself because he never trusted anyone else to smooth the edges, where a person's shin would pay for a mistake. The house looks out at the water and pretends to be tough. It is as tough as a widow needs it to be, and twice as forgiving. I put the kettle on the back burner and took the cedar chest key from the hook inside the pantry door. I have always kept our papers close. People keep theirs in banks and safety deposit boxes. I keep mine where I can smell the cedar when the lid opens. Inside the chest, the partnership papers my husband and I signed when we put our name on the dock. The loan agreement from the year the compressor died and we paid for the replacement with the money from selling his fishing boat. The permit that let us add 2 slips if we could bring our own lumber and promise to keep the water clear of ice whenever ships were due. There are the invoices from the time we replaced the electrical run to the pump. The bill of sale for the fryers we bought from a hotel that thought it was too fancy for fish, and the long-form birth certificate with my name printed in that neat way government uses to imply that nothing they do is personal. I laid the documents in a row across the table and lined them up until some of the noise left my chest. There are other papers no one else would think to keep. The song list from a fundraiser we hosted after the flood, the shift schedule from the winter our cook quit, and I learned that a grill requires a different kind of attention than home food does. The flyer from a memorial service for a sailor whose body never came home yet, whose friends still came to the diner to fill a chair he used to take. The receipt for the box of crayons we keep for children, with the note I had written on it in pen, "Ava chose the colors." I keep those things because I have learned that institutions, banks, boards, councils, do not count a memory unless it comes stapled to a context. If you don't bring the staple, you are holding a story they do not have to hear. I poured tea, sat down, and wrote a list, not of grievances. Those make a person small. A list of weights the dock had placed on my back that I had lifted without asking for applause. The night a line parted in sleet, and I crawled along the boards on my belly to tie a ball line with hands that could barely feel the rope. The morning I came down with a fever and went to work anyway because the cook had the flu, and you cannot feed people with excuses. The year Lucas's tuition leapt, and I sold my wedding ring for less than its weight because the clerk couldn't be bothered to care about love. On the other side of the page, I wrote what I knew as hard facts. The corporate registry still shows me as director. The bank loan is secured against my name. The business license is paid with my checks. The fuel supplier's contract lists me as the person who gets called when something goes wrong. I wrote those items slowly so that later, if anyone asked why I did what I did, I could tell them in simple sentences without choking on the truth. People imagine that anger makes you move fast. I have found it slows me to a crawl and then clears a path through a room as if furniture could shift to save me from bumping into it. I washed the cups and set them on the rack my husband built when there were still pennies to put in the jar for the ice machine. I took the long-form birth certificate, folded it into a plastic sleeve to keep steam out, and placed it on top of the partnership papers. I stood in the kitchen and let the quiet take its shape around me until it stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like a container I could fill with something useful. The next morning, I kept my appointments with the day. That's how a person stays human when a child announces you're no longer family in a room full of people clapping. I salted the steps and carried the bag of water conditioner pellets out to the softener because the dishwasher sulks if you neglect it. I checked the diesel pump strainer and cleaned it with the little brush that came with the kit 2 owners ago. I opened the diner and turned on the radio so the news could tell me about parts of the world that are even stranger than mine. The CBC voice felt like an old sweater that smells of coffee. I did not indulge grief. Grief is a luxury you can't afford when eggs are burning. At 9, a man from the supplier came by with the invoices for January fuel. He's new. Good handshake. Clumsy with the lid on the pen. He tried to explain the charges in that tone men learn when they have been told women over 60 need diagrams. I smiled and told him the math before he could find his words. He laughed without meanness and said, "I'll get out of your kitchen." He meant the office. I did not correct him. It is all the same room when you are the one paying the bills. It wasn't until almost noon that Lucas walked in with Alina. He smelled like cologne I would not begrudge a man who didn't intend to drape it over other people's rooms. He looked tired around the eyes but bright in his jaw, the way people do when they are training themselves to believe their new story. "We're doing a walkthrough with a journalist," he said. "We'll be quick." He didn't ask. He was telling me what would happen in the place where I know every sound. I told him, with the voice I use when a customer thinks the pump works faster if he squeezes the handle harder, that the grill was hot and the dishwasher was running, and if he wanted to show the new signage, he should tell the journalist to photograph it outside where wind and light belong in the frame. Alina gave me a look I have never seen on a person who has done a day of hard labor. It was a look that said, "We are past needing permission." At dusk, the lake went gray the way steel wants to be on cold days. They left as politely as two people can when they have declared you irrelevant. The journalist waved for politeness and then nodded at the banner on the wall like a person saluting a new authority. I watched them from the window arrange their faces for the shot that would run on the town website. In it, later, beneath the headline about New Era, I would be visible in the blur, my apron a ghost behind clear glass. It didn't make me angry. It made me meticulous. Anger wastes your weight. Meticulousness teaches you where to place it. When the lunch rush passed and the room breathed out the way kitchens do, once plates come home empty, I wrote 5 lines to myself on the back of a receipt and pinned it inside the cupboard where the good tea bags live. Keep the pump running. Keep the food hot. Keep the papers close. Keep your words straight. Keep your back warm. A person can carry a list like that long after she is too old to be lifted by speeches. The diner's windows reflected the room back at itself so that it looked double, inside and out, like a tide table. I locked the drawer with petty cash, counted the till, and wrote the deposit slip in block letters, because bank tellers don't deserve my bad penmanship in the dark of winter. I propped the closed sign so it wouldn't swing, and I walked down the dock to check the ropes on the last boat, the half ice in the slip making a sound like a muffled wind chime. The rope bit into my palm the way rope does when it remembers things your skin has forgotten how to accept gracefully. Back upstairs, I opened the cedar chest again and laid papers in the order a world understands: registration, bank, license, loan. I slid the birth certificate into the top pocket of a red folder because in this country, that document holds more gravity than any caption written by someone you ate supper with twice. I added 3 photographs that show what the dock is in real life. A summer night with the northern lights low enough to touch if you were foolish. A January afternoon with my husband bent over the newel post, laughter in the line of his back. A small girl's hand on the bell rope, a woman's hand over hers, teaching her to pull with enough strength to be heard, but not enough to strain the cord. Then I shut the chest, slid the key back onto the pantry hook, and washed the teacup as if the day could be scoured to what it really was beneath the coatings of language other people had applied. I won't say the sentence Lucas spoke stopped echoing right away. It didn't. It nestled into my ribs and kept its small, hard shape. Not part of family operations. I wondered which part was supposed to hurt worse. The idea that they had a family I wasn't in, or the idea that operations had replaced home. I decided the hurt wasn't the point. The point was whether the dock and the diner could be made to stand inside a story that did not throw its founders into the lake and call it progress. The point was whether my granddaughter would grow up thinking people are inventory you shuffle, when a slide looks better, balanced with a different set of initials. Toward the end of that first night, I went down the back stairs to the freezer to check the seals, because the temp had dipped low, and the door sometimes sneaks open if the latch isn't convinced. The air in the stairwell smelled of onions and diesel and the kind of clean a person achieves with effort. I put my hand on the wall because it steadies me. I said out loud, not dramatic, just so the sound would reach my own ear, "I am here." The wall did not answer. It did not need to. The sound of the freezer motor settling into its proper hum was enough. It's a humble thing, a compressor held together by bolts and a maintenance schedule, but it tells the truth about whether you're doing your job. When I lay down, the house made the sounds houses make when they know your weight better than anyone else does. I fell asleep knowing in a plain way what the morning would require. The same list as always, plus one new item that changes a season. Bread, coffee, fuel, papers. You can't cook a storm down to size, but you can put a kettle on and work your way through the ingredients while it goes on doing what weather does. That is how the next chapter will begin, though I won't call it next to anyone's face. In the morning, I will salt the steps and sweep the floor. Then I will step into town with my red folder, ask the clerks for forms whose names I already know, and let my handwriting be the thing that insists I belong in the sentence. A person doesn't have to slam doors to make a correction. Sometimes she only has to turn a handle that sticks and keep turning until it gives. Some reckonings don't need an audience. They sound like a pen clicking, a date stamp thudding the same way every time, a clerk saying, "Next," without judgment. If you've lived by a big lake long enough, you learn that storms are just weather, and paperwork is just a way to keep your footing when it hits. The morning after my son told a room that I wasn't part of family operations, I found myself grateful for the kind of mercy that only forms and lines can give. Spaces to put your name. Places where truth sits still long enough to be seen. I opened the diner at 5 because eggs don't care what happened yesterday. Coffee took its first breath like a boat engine deciding to behave. I salted the steps and propped the door for the minute I always do, to let the air exchange. The radio told me what the highway was up to and mentioned a snow squall line out by Nipigon. I wiped the counter with the cloth I keep for mornings when my hands need a job before my mouth gets ideas. I put the red folder by the cash register where I could see it but not trip over it, then counted the till. Numbers behaved, which felt like a blessing. By 9, I had hemmed a pair of coveralls with duct tape fixes that needed replacing, and I'd put 2 breakfast sandwiches into a paper bag for the plow driver, who always says sorry when he drips on the floor, as if water should have asked permission before it melted. When Mrs. Ritchie from the bait shop came in for a black coffee and a honey cruller, she set a hand on top of the folder like it might skitter if left to itself. "You taking that into town?" she asked, neutral as the lake when it's tired of being dramatic. I said I was. She nodded the way people nod when they are both sorry and proud at once. "Get the tracking numbers," she said, and I smiled because there's a kind of shared grammar here. We all know what keeps us upright. I locked the diner at 10, left the bell sign hanging with a note that read, "Back in 1 hour," and walked across to the municipal building. Thunder Bay has the kind of offices that erase themselves. Beige linoleum, corkboards with flyers for everything from yoga to septic inspections, a plant that does better than it looks like it should. The service counter had a bowl of pens, and a woman behind it who knew exactly how much help to offer, without making me feel like a charity case. "Heritage and working waterfront?" she asked, because the red folder tells a certain story. I nodded. She handed me a packet, checklist, explanatory sheet, the bylaw number printed in bold like scripture. "You'll want to show continuous use," she said. "Photographs, invoices, business license renewals, community letters. Don't pretty the pictures. They prefer the real state of things." I said, "I'm a better hand with a kettle than a filter," and she laughed. It's good to make someone laugh in a room built for heaviness. We filled out the intake form together. Name, address, parcel number, description of significance. I wrote plainly, "Working dock and diner serving Thunder Bay since 1998. Site of community services during storms and rescue operations. Continuous family operation. Foundation repairs completed in 2004 after ice damage." I left out adjectives and salvation stories. The clerk put a sticky note on the top with an email address and said, "Send the digital photos here. Paper copies to us. If you want temporary protection while the full application is reviewed, initial this box and we'll flag it." I initialed. The pen left a solid line like a line you can step on. From there, I cut across to the corporate registry window in the same building. A younger man in a tie too tight asked me for the company name. I spelled McKenna Dock Diner and slid over our original articles and the most recent annual return I'd filed, with hands that smelled of onions and soap. He typed for a long time. His eyebrows made a small jump when the screen told him what I already knew. I am still the director of record, majority shareholder. "Would you like a certified copy?" he asked. 3, I said. I paid the fee and watched the machine emboss the seal until I could feel the weight of it through the paper. Nobody clapped. That was the point. The law office is 2 blocks from there and up a set of stairs that sit steeper than the town would build now. My lawyer, Baxter, is the kind of man who puts his hand on a file like it's a kettle. He wants to be trustworthy. He had cleared an hour. We spoke less about what hurt and more about what would hold. He reviewed the registry documents and nodded, the nod of a person who knows the difference between a story and a fact. "We can stabilize authority," he said, and laid out the tools. Board resolutions, signing rules, revocations where needed. Trust language if you want to point the future at a specific person. We wrote the resolutions first. He printed them on heavy paper that coaxed my pen into better posture. Resolution 1. Reaffirm directorship and majority shareholding as per registry. Resolution 2. Require 2 authorized signatures for asset sales, rebranding, and any binding corporate commitments over a set threshold. Resolution 3. Revoke any informal or implied agency authority not recorded in minutes. We set the directors' meeting for 10 days out at the yacht club. Neutral ground with chairs that creak all the same. He prepared a formal notice to Lucas and anyone acting on his behalves, the kind of phrase that catches people who think they're only helping. Then we drew the shape of the rest. I did not want to cut my son out of my will. I wanted to make sure my granddaughter's future wasn't collateral for somebody else's pitch deck. We established an education trust for Ava, funded by a slice of dock dividends each year, administered by me while I breathe, and by the Museum Society if I don't. Not a fancy trust, no gloss, just a line in a document the bank would treat like a wall. We added a clause. The dock's name and physical features may not be sold or renamed as a condition of the trust's benefit. He looked at me over his glasses. "You will be called sentimental," he said. "That's allowed," I said, "so long as the sentences add up." We withdrew my personal guarantee from the operating line of credit. It wasn't vindictive. It was arithmetic. My husband and I had signed our names beside each other to get that credit when we were younger, and the bank manager still thought my apron meant I shouldn't talk numbers. Removing my name now would mean the bank would call to update terms with my son. They would use a voice that knows how to ask for a plan. That conversation was his to have. Baxter drafted the letter to the bank. He also drafted one to the fuel supplier, confirming that all accounts payable remain in good standing, and all delivery authorizations would require either my signature or 2 of the people named on the resolutions. Fuel moves boats. Boats move people. I wanted those movements to respect the dock that kept them from drowning. I also want to separate my personal accounts from any corporate tool my son thinks he can reach with a login, I said gently. Baxter prepared a revocation of any power of attorney I'd given when my husband died, and grief had made the world seem like a hallway where every door required a signature. He named me alone as the signatory on my accounts. He named a friend as backup should I break a hip on ice and need someone to make sense of pharmacy counters. He repeated something he'd said to me once when I was younger and furious about a supplier who had mishandled a delivery. Clarity is not cruelty. I put the sentence in my pocket. By the time I left the law office, I had a stack of papers in a fresh red folder. One set for me, one for the bank, one to serve to Lucas by registered mail. My steps on the stairs felt like punctuation. Here, here, here. On the street, the air had shifted toward afternoon. A woman in a parka carried a cake box like treasure. The shaping of a life sometimes looks like a person protecting something sweet from wind. Canada Post sits in a building that smells of paper and winter boots. I bought registered envelopes because a tracking number talks for you in rooms you'll never get to stand in. I addressed 3. Lucas, the bank, the fuel supplier's head office. I added a 4th to myself, a copy of the resolutions and the trust document. Because if you're going to tell the truth, it helps to know where it will land. The clerk weighed each envelope, as if each weighed exactly what it did, and looked up at me long enough to find the line between pity and respect. "Anything else today?" she asked. "Not that you can sell me at a counter," I said, and we both smiled in that small way humans do when they recognize work that won't fit in a bag. Back at the diner, the lunch rush had the decency to arrive in a wave and then recede. A crew from the hydro yard filled the corner booths and stacked their gloves on the radiator to steam. I kept pace and kept quiet. When the last bill was paid, I took off my apron and washed my hands like the papers wanted them clean. The phone buzzed on the shelf. A text from Alina. "Let's please align comms," it read. "Media rollout underway. Your personal posts could confuse messaging." "I do not have personal posts. I have a kettle." I did not answer her. The next ping came from Lucas. "We should talk. Don't overreact." I set the phone down and penciled a note on my printed menu. Eggs up, truth down. It made me laugh. Laughing kept my jaw from locking. That evening, I took photographs for the heritage packet. Not pretty ones, real ones. The way the planks darken where boots always cross. The fuel pump casing with that slight dent from the winter the plow misjudged. The hand-lettered sign my husband made when the card machine went down and we took IOUs for 48 hours because the storm had somewhere else to be. I photographed the inside of the compressor cabinet because I once promised a young inspector we'd keep a record of its serial plate. I wrote notes on the backs and put the date in pencil in the corner because future me would be mad if I didn't. I printed them in the office on paper that curls a little at the corners and slid them into plastic sleeves as if putting a quilt top behind glass. When I closed, the lake's edge had the look of a person who has decided to say something after a long silence. I walked down to feel the ropes in my hands. They tell me more than gauges sometimes. I looped the line on slip 3, felt where the fibers had flattened, made a mental note to splice a fresh section on Saturday. A gull watched me from a post like a critic with a small budget. I told it nothing. I went upstairs and took the cedar chest key from its hook. Papers went in the order the town likes them. Registration, licenses, photos, letters, trust, resolutions. I added a copy of the long-form birth certificate to the top, not as a stunt, but as a reminder to myself. The truth arrives in different shapes: ink, wood, ice, a baby's first cry in a winter room. The shape doesn't make it less true. 3. In the days that followed, the work sorted itself into columns. On the left, the things the dock demanded the way it always had. Salt the steps. Mop when the slush turned traitor near the door. Replace the bulb over the grill that burned out at the exact wrong time. Run vinegar through the coffee maker because scale accumulates as surely as anything else does. On the right, the calls and signatures of a person writing a life back into its proper order. I submitted the heritage packet by email and by hand because I have never met a file too well behaved to trust with a single root. I carried letters of support from the volunteer rescue crew, men and women who know exactly how much our dock mattered the night their radios came alive and needed a place with light, coffee, and permission to be messy. I asked the church administrator to sign a letter about our fundraiser breakfasts during the flood year. She did. I asked the bait shop's owner to sign one about us keeping a warm side door open for kids, waiting for the school bus on days the wind decided to test families. He wrote 2 sentences that sounded like him and would therefore carry weight with anyone who had spent a winter here. 4. Bank day came with its own weather. I wore a clean blouse and a cardigan that doesn't pill because softness has its place, but not in front of a loan officer. The manager knows me. Like most knowing here, it is a practical intimacy, built on handshakes that sometimes have fish scales on them. We sat at his small round table while his computer hummed and his screen glowed like all decision screens do. I handed over the letter Baxter had drafted and the resolutions. He read without comment. "We'll need to adjust the line," he said, neutral. "We'll notify the other signatory." He meant my son. "Send him the same letter you sent me," I said. "He should see the facts in the same order I did." The manager nodded, not in sympathy, in procedure. I like him for that. 5. The fuel supplier's office answered my email with a polite acknowledgement. Accounts current, delivery authorizations updated, new contact protocols accepted. I printed the message and clipped it behind the account ledger where future Nora would assume she had the sense to put it. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and made myself a grilled cheese as payment for doing what adults do. The right thing in the right sequence without expecting applause. 6. Of course, there was pushback. There always is when you move a line someone else had enjoyed nudging. Alina called 3 times in one afternoon. I did not pick up. She sent a long message about brand alignment, legacy positioning, and outdated naming conventions. I screenshot it and filed it in a folder named Communications Received. Lucas's email arrived at midnight. He used bullet points to try to turn our life into something the Chamber of Commerce would applaud. "Market demands shift," he wrote. "We aren't erasing you, we're evolving." He wrote family twice and operations 4 times. The math told on him. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe and wrote a reply that attached 2 documents, my birth certificate and his. I did not add commentary. I believe in letting a person meet his own reflection without fuss. I also attached the director's meeting notice and agenda, and I CC'd Baxter. I wrote the date into my paper diary and drew a plain box around it. 7 neighbors talk. They can't help it. The cold needs something to do besides hurt. But Thunder Bay has a generosity I haven't found other places. People here will carry your business only as far as the coffee refill. Then they will put it down because their own business needs their hands back. At the Legion Fish Fry, a man I barely know squeezed my elbow and said, "Good catch on the 2 signature rule." He used the kind of voice men use when they admire a tool's function. At the grocery, a woman who once came to me with a wedding dress emergency looked at me too long and then said, "Your chowder still the same?" I said it was. She put 2 potatoes in her cart like a vote for something that didn't need the ballot. 8. The temporary heritage protection email arrived on a Tuesday at 3:17 p.m. because bureaucracy has its own stubborn magic. It makes big news show up at unremarkable hours. The subject line was plain. The body of the email was plainer. Approval pending full review. Certificate attached. Conditions outlined in the bylaw. No structural changes allowed without council consideration. The municipal seal embossed cleanly when I printed it at the office. I slid 1 copy into the red folder and another into a frame, then taped the second to the inside of the diner's front door at eye level. I did not add a caption. A certificate needs no narration. 9. That night I slept the sleep of people who have finished 1 whole layer of a job. Not done, but to a point where you can set the tool down and pick it up tomorrow without losing your place. In the morning, I wrote a list of next steps. Hold the directors' meeting, present at the community session about working waterfronts, place orders for spring so fuel and buns arrive on time regardless of anyone's theories about what a marina is supposed to be. I called the yacht club and booked their small room for the meeting. They wrote McKenna Board on the calendar in the kind of blocky lettering that can be read through fogged glass. I smiled. Names matter. Fonts won't save you, but they can make a thing's shape true. 10 tension did what tension does. It tightened odd places. Lucas stopped coming by the diner in the mornings. He sent staff to pick up sandwiches on his tab and told them not to linger. Alina posted a podcast called Unsticking Legacy, and a friend sent me a link with a sad face. I listened for 3 minutes to the part where she described a woman clinging to a dock sign like it holds back winter. Then I turned it off because the grill needed scraping, and I won't leave the dining room smelling like a skillet at closing. The developer, Aaron, I learned, phoned to say they would pause, while scope was reassessed. He had the good sense to sound professional instead of wounded. I told him the coffee is always better after a pause if a person remembers to rinse the urn. He laughed the way men laugh when they're grateful you saved them from a speech. 11 small mercies kept arriving, proof that the world still understands what counts. The volunteer rescue lead dropped off a laminated letter with a map of where they set up triage during storms. He'd drawn an X over our diner with the marker a person uses when he expects to need the map again. The bait shop taped a handwritten note to their door that read, McKenna Dock coffee voucher with purchase of minnows, until the ice says otherwise. A teacher sent her students to interview me for a project called Work That Holds, and they asked better questions than most adults do. Why do you trust paper? One girl asked. Because it tells the same story tomorrow, I said. She wrote that down like it might help her somewhere the rest of us will never be invited. The directors' meeting came due on a morning when the sky looked like a photograph that forgot to develop. Baxter sat at one end of the table. I sat beside him. A chair waited for Lucas. He arrived with Alina and the tautness of a person who expected to wrestle and discovered we had set out a ledger, not an arena. We went through the agenda as if it were a grocery list. Approve minutes of the last formal meeting. Years ago, because sailors and widows are not good at minutes when the world is loud. Adopt resolutions. Notify stakeholders. He objected to the wording in the clause about branding. Baxter pointed to the bylaw. Lucas asked if we were trying to humiliate him. I shook my head. I'm trying to make sure facts don't have to knock for admission, I said. He signed where the law asked him to sign. His hand did not shake. He would make speeches later. His fingers know how to hold a pen. After we adjourned, there was an awkwardness that reminded me of a boat idling against a dock. Exactly as noisy as it needs to be. No more. Alina said, "You could have told us," which is a funny sentence to say to the person you told the world didn't belong. I said nothing. I put the signed copies in the red folder, and the sound of the clasp clicking felt like a small lid closing on an old jar of nails. Necessary, unremarkable, ready for use if needed. 14. The following week, the town posted a notice. Working waterfront community conversation. I was on the list to speak. So was a man from the tourism office and an elder from Fort William First Nation who would talk about river and lake long before any of us put chairs near it. The notice sat on the corkboard between Pilates and an ad for secondhand skis. That felt right. If you want to save a place, you hang the reason where people put their hands. I kept cooking. I kept sweeping. I kept my voice low in the mornings and my hand steady on the receipts. I put a jar by the till with a piece of masking tape on it labeled Ava's Books, and nobody asked which Ava. The town knows a 5-year-old by the sound of her feet. The jar filled with toonies and quarters, and the odd bill folded small. Every night I poured it into a bag and wrote the amount next to the line I'd made in the ledger with the quiet care of someone tucking in a child. When I finally sat alone after closing and looked at the red folder where it sat on the counter, I felt a tiredness that had nothing to do with age. But it wasn't the fatigue of losing. It was the ache that follows carrying something heavy on purpose. I made tea and leaned against the counter for the time it takes steam to stop looking like weather. I thought about what comes next, not like a cliff, more like a bend in the shoreline I've walked too many times to call it a surprise. There will be a day with music and banners. The season opening we hold every year that lets boats shake the winter out of their lines and people practice smiling without their faces cracking. There will be a microphone. There will be a moment when I am asked for a few words, because that is what a town does to older women who have kept the lights on. It hands them the cord and asks them to tell the truth kindly. I don't plan speeches. Speeches turn to smoke when you need them. I plan papers and the order they appear in my hand. I plan the sequence of sentences: thank you, correction, clarity, boundary. I plan to put the long planned jar for Ava on the corner of the counter with a small card that says, "For books, not banners." I plan to bake 2 extra pans of bars because people listen better when their mouths know sweetness is possible. What I know most is this: spring comes even when no one deserves it. Ice loosens, ropes thaw, hands remember their own strength. And if a child has been told her grandmother is not family, there will be a day she learns that families are built by the people who show up before dawn to turn on the coffee and after dark to make sure the last boat's line will not part in a sloppy wind. You can argue about what a place is worth. You can rename it for a poster. But somewhere under the ink and varnish, the boards know who kept them oiled. Tomorrow I will check the weather, call the supplier to confirm Friday's delivery, tape the temporary protection certificate back into its frame because the corner has a way of peeling. I will open the door to air even if it's spiteful, and then I will stand at the stove and cook as if nothing grand were happening at all. Bacon and eggs, toast, coffee. After that, when the town gathers for the season opener and the room fills with people who love boats even if they never leave the dock, I will take my place where I belong, not at the center, but close enough to be heard, and I will put the page with the seal on the lectern before I put my hand on it. Paper first, then voice. That is how the next part will hold. Endings in places like ours don't come with drum rolls. They arrive as a well-swept floor, a microphone that works on the first try, a certificate taped where people can see it without being told how to feel. If you live long enough beside a lake that looks like an ocean, you stop waiting for thunder to do the moral work. You trust smaller instruments, paper, order, courtesy that doesn't lie. I'm not offering this as wisdom, only as a weather report from a woman who has cooked through storms and learned that the kettle sings even when the wind insists otherwise. The season opener fell on a Saturday that behaved itself, sun without bragging, air that let jackets hang open, ice sulking thin along the edges where shadows kept it from making a final decision. We set out the folding chairs on the gravel in a crooked half circle the way we always do, the line just irregular enough to make room for the neighbor who prefers to stand. Someone strung flags between 2 posts. They knocked politely against the rope like a dog that knows better than to pull. The rescue crew parked the truck where kids could climb into the cab after the speeches, and the Legion women carried trays with squares that cut cleanly, because knives do as they're told in good light. I opened the diner early so the coffee vats would not embarrass us. The certificate, temporary protection for the working dock in its name, sat in its frame by the door, the seal catching every passerby's shoulder as they came in. People noticed it the way people notice a good roof, by not having to think about what would happen in rain. I posted a small sign at the till, coffee free for crews, $2 for everyone else, honesty jar at the end. Honesty behaves better when you don't stare. Lucas arrived late, or late for a host, which is to say on time for a son, unsure whether he is welcome. He wore the jacket he buys good cologne for, hair in the cut a barber gives to men who plan to be photographed. Alina came at his side, clipboard tucked into her arm because props, steady hands. A man with them, Aaron, the developer, stood a step back, polite enough to take his place without being told. They gathered near the new banner they'd printed weeks ago. Superior Marina, a new era. If words could take a breath, those would have. I stood behind the counter and watched the room sort itself according to its old arithmetic. Fishermen to the left, kids clustered near the rescue truck, town employees in a loose line that let latecomers pretend they'd been there all along. Mrs. Ritchie from the bait shop anchored the back row because some people serve best by keeping a watchful eye from where exit and entrance meet. The mayor came with a handshake and left with a coffee because politicians know what fills a photograph even when they haven't eaten breakfast. I filled his cup and said nothing beyond the temperature of the urn. We don't use amplifiers unless a crowd demands it. This crowd didn't. The MC, a school teacher who can get a gym quiet without raising her voice, stepped onto the pallet we use as a stage and welcomed us to another year of boats pretending they belong on freshwater. She named the people who had given their Saturday mornings to community, the volunteer rescue crew, the Legion bakers, the youth hockey team, hauling chairs in exchange for free fries later. She thanked my diner for coffee and the fact of being warm, which I treasure more than any ribbon. Then she handed the microphone to Lucas. He took it the way men take responsibility when they want to convince you it was their idea. He thanked sponsors, names new to my ear, and talked about upgrades, safety improvements, a refreshed identity. When he said the last part, he glanced at the banner and then at me, and I felt the ghost of our old kitchen in the pause. It was the same half-second he used to take when deciding whether to sneak a cookie before supper. "We're committed to this community," he said, and the sentence held. Commitment can survive bad grammar. He introduced Aaron, who spoke in calm, tidy paragraphs about docks that meet code, docks that meet dreams, docks that meet neither and shouldn't be relied upon. His voice made me wish for a wrench in my hand, not to use on him, but to hold, until the talk in the room weighed the same as something useful. He mentioned partnerships in a manner that could be adjusted to whatever the bank eventually decided about lines of credit. He said scope twice and phased approach once, and then offered the microphone back to the teacher, who scanned the crowd and tilted her head at me. I could have stayed behind the counter. I could have let the certificate do the speaking for me. But the truth is, I wanted the town to hear my voice at the right volume. Neither whisper nor roar, just the sound you make when telling someone how much salt to put in the chowder. I stepped up onto the pallet with my red folder under my arm, set it on the crate we use as a podium, and kept one hand on it as if paper and skin together made a better bridge. "Good morning," I said, and the air carried it the short distance to where it needed to go. "I'm Nora. Most of you know my coffee. Some of you know my temper, which has more to do with empty ketchup bottles than politics." The laugh that came back encouraged me to go on. "I'll be brief. I want to place a few facts where they belong, not to argue with anyone, but to make sure the floor stays level." I lifted the frame with the certificate and turned it so the seal faced the crowd. The city approved temporary protection for the working dock and the name on it, McKenna Dock Diner, while a full review is underway, I said. That means changes to the structure and name aren't on today's menu. We'll keep doing what we've always done, serving coffee, fuel, and a place for crews to do their job without anyone telling them their boots are the wrong kind for the photo. A ranger in the corner lifted his cup in a salute he would deny if you named it. "Second," I said, "we've put new rules in place, the kinds that keep people honest even when they forget they mean to be. Major decisions require 2 signatures. Papers matter, and I brought mine." I touched the folder and let my hand rest there. "Third, I've set up a small trust for my granddaughter and for the community, funded by a slice of what this place earns. The condition is simple. The dock stays a dock, the diner stays a diner, and the sign keeps the name that tells people where they are." I looked at the children chasing each other near the truck and added, "If you grow up with a bell knowing your hand, you should be able to find it when you bring your children by." I didn't look at my son. I looked at the water, because my husband taught me long ago not to argue with the crowd when the lake is listening. "Families change," I said. "Businesses change. I'm not against better paint or safer rails. I am against forgetting who held the rope in a wind that didn't ask permission to blow." I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. Names were already doing their jobs on paper. I stepped down before anyone could clap in a way that mistook the moment for a performance. Applause feels wrong when the job is accuracy. The teacher thanked me with a nod a person uses in classrooms when a child brings the right tool to a problem. Then we did what communities do when the talking has gone on long enough. We ate. Kids clambered into the rescue truck. A dog stole half a sandwich and was forgiven. A couple took a photograph in front of the flag line to send to a cousin in Calgary who misses the way Superior pretends to be ocean. So convincingly you can smell the lie and love it anyway. Consequences, like weather, arrived in layers. The first was a conversation I didn't have to overhear because it walked across the gravel with its jacket open. Aaron telling Lucas they'd table rebranding until paperwork stopped standing like a fence. Not a fight. Math. The second, an email from the bank the following Monday asking for updated financial projections, given recent governance changes. It used polite words to require what I had hoped it would, a plan that made sense under numbers, not photos. The third, a call from the city inviting me to present our working dock story at a regional meeting, because a lot of towns are staring at the same choice. I said yes, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted our version of care. Coffee, clean floors, ropes coiled right, to be on record somewhere a stranger could borrow courage from. There were smaller items, too. Alina's podcast published an episode called When Legacy Fights Back. The clip I heard didn't name me. It didn't need to. She used a tone reserved for people who believe resistance is a personality flaw. I turned it off when the grill needed flipping and forgot to turn it back on. The CLO of a local tourism group emailed to ask whether we'd consider tasteful co-branding for the summer's Paddle Fest. I told her we'd print Paddle Fest special on a chalkboard and sell pancakes for $5. She allowed that might be better. Lucas took longer. Sons do. He came to the diner on a Wednesday between lunch and the hour when the light slants so low you see every crumb. He waited until the last table cleared because he has some of his father left in him. When he spoke, he looked at the coffee cup as if honesty might be hiding in the dark. "I wanted to do something big," he said. "I let big rewrite what didn't need changing." He lifted his eyes then, a risk I decided to honor by staying still. "I'm angry," he added. "I'm also embarrassed. Not of you. Of how I used your name like a rug to wipe my feet before walking into a room I'd already decided belonged to me. If you've ever watched a rope untwist and retwist itself in a steady hand, you'll understand the next piece. I didn't forgive him in a speech. I filled his cup. "You'll pay the bank a visit," I said. "You'll explain what the money is for and what it isn't. You'll stop calling things legacy when what you mean is old. And you'll come early Saturday and scrape the grill." He smiled then, tired. "Grill?" "Grill," I said. "If you can stand the smoke, you can stand a correction." We didn't talk about Alina. Life has a way of deciding which characters get a second season. She sent me a message a week later proposing a collaboration for social content. I replied with the photo of the certificate and a line that read, "We'll collaborate on clean floors and on-time deliveries." She didn't write back. A month later, I heard she'd taken a contract in Toronto. She will do fine. The city is full of rooms where microphones don't smell faintly of fish. There is a kind of pride I allow myself without apology now. It has nothing to do with winning. It's smaller and steadier than that. It's the feeling of scraping the griddle until it shines and knowing no one will take a photograph, and that the absence of a photograph is what keeps food tasting the way it should. It's the sense of a community meeting ending with people going home to houses with roofs they trust. It's watching your granddaughter run the length of the dock with a life jacket zipped properly and the rope coiled in her hand because you put it there and she didn't argue. A reporter from the local paper came by to write a follow-up after the opener. She ordered coffee and asked to sit by the window because light flatters both of us. Her questions were not cruel. "Do you feel vindicated?" she asked. I said no. Vindication is a firework. We didn't need fire. "What do you call what happened?" She tried again. I said, "Maintenance." She looked disappointed and then relieved. Maintenance is not a headline, but it keeps you through February. She wrote the piece anyway. The photograph showed my hand on the bell rope, the sign in the background, the frame at the door catching a sliver of sun. She spelled my name right. That was enough. Inside the diner, work returned to its steady rhythm. The hiss of the grill, the ring of the register, the low talk of people who know how to add the tip in their heads without performing generosity. Outside, the dock held as it has held since we paid for the lumber, with a check the bank manager squinted at before deciding not to make us explain ourselves more than we already had. The temporary protection will become something more durable if the review goes well. If it doesn't, we will still behave like a protected place. Laws help, but habit saves you when the paperwork takes a day off. You asked for a comment to close this story, a personal judgment. I can give you one without raising my voice. People say blood doesn't matter, that chosen families outrank the kind you were born into. I don't disagree when chosen families do the work, but blood doesn't matter gets used too often as permission to draft strangers into a story they didn't build. There's a reason my son's long-form certificate sits in my folder. Not to brandish it, but to remind me that obligations were written down before any of us learned to sell a narrative. Blood matters when it moves a person to show up for the ugly shifts, the early mornings, the late-night calls where the pump screams and the freezer sulks, and nothing glamorous happens except that we keep other people from going hungry. If that isn't family, then the word is only a logo, and we should stop pretending it feeds anyone. I didn't turn my son's world upside down. I put mine back on its feet. If that makes his tilt for a while, then perhaps he'll learn the feeling of solid ground the way a person learns the weight of a rope, by holding it until pull and resistance name each other correctly. He has started to come in earlier. He has started to say we when he means all of us, and I only when he's owning a mistake. He scraped the grill last Saturday without dramatics and left smelling like onions, and the beginning of a correction. I sent him home with 2 bowls of chowder and a stack of pancakes for Ava. He forgot the pancakes on the counter and turned back from the parking lot to get them. We are not healed. We are behaving. When I lock up at closing, I touch the bell out of habit, not for luck. The lake breathes its slow breath. A single light on the dock throws a path that looks like a plan and isn't, not really. Just enough illumination to make the next step a choice instead of a guess. In the kitchen, I rinse the coffee urn and prop the lid so it doesn't trap the kind of smell that makes morning harder than it needs to be. I check the frame on the certificate and press the corner down where the tape lifts. Then I sit at the counter and write a few lines in a notebook that has seen better days and better handwriting. Thanked volunteers. Replace bulb over grill. Call bank Tuesday. Ask Ava about her library day. It isn't grand. It's the list that keeps our world right side up. If you took anything from this winter of papers and speeches and coffee, let it be this. When the story gets loud, find something you can do with your hands that tells the truth quietly. Sweep, sign, stir. Touch the door frame on your way out so the house knows you're coming back. Stand where you belong, even if someone with a banner suggests you've aged out of your own life. And if you must speak into a microphone, put the document on the lectern first. Paper, then voice. It's not romantic, it's reliable.